All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into another one of my interviews here with me, William Wallace for America. As you know, and I always repeat this, I love my candidates because they are the most passionate about their country, our country. They're the most passionate about their ideas and their solutions, unlike our officials who are in office, who are usually more passionate about narratives than solutions. With me today is another person that I met at CPAC in Orlando, Mark. I'm gonna let him say his last name because I'm gonna butcher it. He's running for Senate in New York. Mark, thank you so much for being with me today. Could you please tell everybody how you say that last name?
Szuszkiewicz. So it's shoe is in a pair of shoes, skev, and then each, and it's hopefully Szuszkiewicz versus Schumer, and which shoe is the right fit for you. And it's time to give Chuck Schumer the boot.
I love that. I love how you connected everything there. Shoe as in shoe, and then you connected kick the boot. Love it. So you're actually running against Chuck Schumer.
That is the plan. I am going to have a Republican primary on June 28th, but I hopefully, the plan was not to run against another Republican, but if I have to do that first, then that's fine. But Chuck Schumer was who I was targeting. I ran for local office in South Brooklyn the last 2 years, and I figured the best way to make a difference in New York is to run for a statewide election because this year is the most important election in New York's state's history. We need a Republican governor in office, and by running for U.S. Senate, I could get rid of Chuck Schumer. I could help win the governor race for whoever the Republican candidate ends up being, and then at the same time, hopefully flip some state assembly, state senate, and congressional seats along the way as well. So
I love the overall plan. I love how you're not just thinking about you're thinking about your state. And, I always tell people that while I'm trying to do things to, protect our country and be able to help save our country, I always say that it begins at home. And I
yeah,
like the fact that you're not just saying, hey, vote for Mark because I want to win Senate. You're saying, hey, I want to be part of a team that protects our state and also eventually will protect our country.
yeah.
I
I
like
mean, the Senate seat, when it comes down to it, people sometimes say, "Well, I don't live in New York, so I can't vote for you." I was like, "Well, you could still donate. It is the U.S. Senate seat. It is the Senate Majority Leader. In my opinion, the second most powerful politician next to Chuck Schumer. I know in line of succession, it's President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, but there's 100 senators in the country." And if you're the Senate Majority Leader, you have more of a impact on legislation than the Speaker of the House does. And that's my opinion. Some people think the Speaker of the House is more powerful, but this is, in my opinion, the second most powerful politician in the country. So if you want to get rid of Chuck Schumer, that affects everywhere in the country. But like I said, I mean, the reason why I ran is to take New York State back and to take our country back. So it's a lot of reasons why I could have. The last 2 years I ran in heavily Democrat districts. My state assembly race in 2020 was 34% in 2016, and I was ahead 9% on election night. So nobody thought I had a chance to win. My election was probably stolen. Most likely was. But, I didn't let it discourage me. I ran for city council in a district that was 27% in 13 and 17. They screwed me out of matching funds. It's 8-1 matching funds in New York City local elections. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, but they contested that, and or should have gotten a large amount of matching funds like the Democrat candidate did, but I didn't, and I still got 49% on election night, 47% overall. So despite literally everything in my way, I continue to fight on with very little money in the last two elections. I'm hoping that more people contribute because this is a statewide election and it's not just about me. It's about taking New York back. It's about taking the country back. And, I'm doing what I can. I could have ran for state assembly what I ran in 2020 and probably win by a landslide and be an elected official with the government salary and have a voice and take almost a layup win. But instead, I'm looking to fight for the entire state and country. So
Well, you're choosing a harder race. I see what you're saying there, but I also understand. I tell my candidates that, again, that while the establishment candidates and have been in office forever talk narratives, and they talk about what people want to hear, our candidates actually bring up, not only new ideas, which can later become part of a platform if you don't win of somebody else's platform, but
Yep.
you're bringing up fresh ideas and fresh solutions. And I think that is almost as important, if not more important, than winning a race sometimes. I mean, granted,
100%.
I want to see you in there, and we'd love to see good candidates win the election, but sometimes if you have to throw yourself on a sword, so to speak, just to be able to get your voice heard and your ideas heard, that could be a win for not only your state, but for our country. And I
Yeah,
really
100%.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, when I ran in 2020, the old website was mark4ny.com, which I still have archived, and it still has some of my ideas on the local, the state and the federal level. But then, Mark for New York spelled out is the new one because it's a different, this is my FEC account, Mark for New York. The state account was Mark for NY, the original one. But I put the ideas out there about regulating bank overdraft fees back in 2020. And I went to CPAC when I was a local candidate, not a federal candidate. And, I will go to the Turning Point USA events, and I go to other national events across the country. And I was always criticized, like, you need to be in your district more, Mark. What do you like? Why don't you don't win local elections by being at protests in
Right.
Manhattan when your district is in Brooklyn, or going to Florida to CPAC, and it's like, what are you doing? It's like, well, this is not a normal time. This is not a normal election where I'm just focusing on winning an election, where we have, a very difficult, unique situation in our country, with these mandates and lockdowns. And in New York, we have the bail reform bill. And, there's, ideas that you can implement these ideas in Louisiana. You could implement them in Arkansas. You can implement them anywhere. So if I put my ideas out there, even if I'm a local candidate, from day one, I was hoping it would inspire other people to look at the ideas. And believe it or not, I remember Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas herself, called out
Yeah.
Jamie Dimon as the king of overdraft fees. Like, I was the first person in the world of politics to bring up overdraft fees, and I got national attention when I won my state assembly race. I got bashed by the New York, even the New York Post, which is supposed to be a friendly to Republicans, and call me this QAnon crazy conspiracy theorist, whatever, everything they could throw at me, because the Republican came out of nowhere and took a South Brooklyn seat that there hasn't been a Republican in Coney Island, Brooklyn, in like 100 years. And they're trying to make it seem like all of a sudden South Brooklyn is filled with racist QAnon crazy people or something. Like, no,
Now,
that's not what they voted for me. They looked at my platform. They saw that I had ideas. I wasn't just talking about problems like other politicians do. I actually bring solutions. I actually bring ideas to the table. And like you said, the website has a long list of them. I brought up the overdraft fees just because I know Elizabeth Warren brought it up after I won my election. So I got the attention of people.
what election did you win?
The state assembly seat in South Brooklyn, in
So
2020.
you were a state rep in 2020, you said?
No. I said my election was stolen. Like I said that before. So I was ahead 9% on election night, by approximately 3,000 votes, and I lose by 1%. So that's a long story in itself. But so basically the same time as Trump. So thought I won the election, and then a month later I didn't win the election. So. But that's like I said, it's a long story in itself. But I got the media because people thought I won, and it was like there's no chance. There wasn't enough paper ballots at the time to win, and then another 4,000 come in after election day, and it's a long story behind that. But
It's kind of like when the guy in Minnesota, Al Franken, lost the election, and then a couple of days later, they found a few thousand or whatever it was votes in the back of a trunk of a car that had been abandoned, and they found that all the signatures, even though they were all for him, all the ballots were for him. They, of course, didn't contest that. But I'm big on election integrity. It's interesting because I've got friends who are Republicans that still think that the last election was a fair and honest election, even though there's more and more proof coming out that our elections are being stolen through the mail-in ballot system. And everybody jokes about the dead voting, and we know about ballot harvesters, but nobody wants to stand up for our elections. And whether you agree or disagree with it, there's enough proof that there is election fraud in elections, whether it's enough to turn over the elections or not. We need to tackle those problems so we don't keep having election problems or even doubts in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you have, people say, oh, there was, they like to say, oh, well, there was fraud, but not enough to overturn. That's the common thing. There's not enough to overturn the election.
Yeah, there wasn't enough to
How do we know that there wasn't enough to overturn the election? Like, that's supposed to just be an acceptable answer. There shouldn't be. If there was fraud, then people need to go to jail. It needs to be investigated, and people need to go to jail. And some people do go to jail, but not many. And just because a few people go to jail doesn't mean that only a few crimes were committed. There are plenty of people that commit murders and drug deals and all types of illegal activity that don't get caught. It's the same thing with voter fraud. There are plenty of people that commit voter fraud and they just don't get caught. So that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean that there isn't evidence. It's just a lot of times it's not investigated. You have a lot of crimes that don't go investigated. You have a backlog of rape kits in this country and multiple cities of thousands that are sitting in a warehouse that people just don't even investigate. And these were people that were raped. So, I mean, you don't have people looking into a lot of crimes, and people don't look into election fraud either. They just accept it as what it is. So
exactly, and it's disheartening for me. I can talk about election integrity all day long. I have about 4 or 5 podcasts that I've done just on election integrity.
And you get banned for saying that, because I've done ones, and once it goes on YouTube and you're talking about election integrity, they take the video down. That happened with a popular podcast that I did with another host.
Yep, I've had 3 of my election integrity videos taken down off of YouTube. And I went to Mike Lindell's symposium. I've interviewed Wendy Rogers. I've had Pat Kolbick on my show, David Clements, Doug Frank. They've all been on my show talking about the election crime. So
I will say, before we move on, I will say one thing that happened from my specific election, because you had about over 16,000 absentee ballot requests in my district, and 9,000 of them came back. 5,000 on election day, 4,000 after election day. Some of them didn't count; they weren't eligible, duplicate votes, whatever the case may be. But the reality is 16,000 people didn't actually request it. A lot of those were done online, and I asked for the IP addresses in a Freedom of Information Act request, and they told me that I had to pay 25 cents per page, and 16,000 pages, whatever. But what that did accomplish is, the following year, the New York City Board of Elections no longer allows their employees to request absentee ballots for people that called in. So they're trying to say that people called in to the Board of Elections and then they went online and did it for them. But when in reality, the people that work at the Board of Elections are Democrats and Republicans, and they have access to the voter roll. So they would go and they would request absentee ballots for people. And I know this because I know Democrats that received absentee ballots and did not request them. A lot of times they don't even live at that address anymore, and they were getting absentee ballots in the mail. So what that did is it got, just like they have in California, which is legal over there, for where everyone gets an absentee ballot. Well, everyone, it's not an absentee ballot, it's just a vote by mail ballot. In this case, in New York, it's a little different. It's absentee. You actually have to request one, and you used to actually have to have a reason for one. But what the C word did was create the no excuse absentee ballot, where you don't have to be out of town, you don't have to have a disability or anything, and you could just request one. And that's why we had the ability for people to cheat using the vote by mail system. But what
So
happened is, so the following year they didn't allow it, and there was significantly less paper ballot requests because the people who work at the Board of Elections were no longer allowed to go online at the Board of Elections office and put in ballot applications for people.
let's. I want to get back because obviously, and that's gonna be one of my questions, is that you believe in election integrity and you're against the crimes that happen during elections. And as a senator of the United States Senate, you will do everything you can to fight against election crimes in the future. So not
Yeah,
only
one of the things that's listed on the website is voter ID for all federal elections. Elections in New York and California, when you're talking about congressional and Senate races, they affect everyone in the country. So if you're running for a federal election, your state could, think voter ID is racist or whatever nonsense excuse you have. Number one, it isn't. It's a common sense thing that most Americans agree with. Showing an ID to prove you are who you say you are is not that far fetched. It's nothing racist about it. We all know, number one, you need an ID to do pretty much anything in life: board a plane, get a hotel, get
right,
cigarettes, get alcohol, go to a movie theater if you don't look like you're 18 or whatever. Like, buy a certain plenty of things you have to buy or
right.
do in order to live life is have an ID. And yeah, it can't be expired and things of that nature. So okay, they say some people don't have money, but to pay a renewal fee or whatever. The answer to that question, well, first of all, I say these unicorns that don't have ID. There's very few. When they say the racist or whatever, that it's the black community that doesn't have IDs. There's videos done about this. They go to white liberal areas in Berkeley, California, and ask people, "Oh yeah, these people, they don't have ID." And then you go to Harlem and you ask people, of course they have an ID, and they ask them if you think voter ID is racist, and none of the black people in Harlem thought the concept of asking for an ID to vote is actually racist. This is a false media narrative
False media narrative.
that's
So
brainwashing a lot of people. But aside from that, the Board of Elections, the amount of money that they spend on elections for all these extra things that they do, they could provide a free ID for somebody that comes in, proves who they are, and gets a free ID for the sake of voting. If you
you,
don't have money in New York, you have a Medicaid card or a food stamp card, and that has a photo on it. That's a state photo ID. So if you don't have money, chances are you're on benefits, welfare, food stamps, and you have an ID for that. So there should be reasonable, acceptable
mhm.
forms of ID. And if you don't have any of those for some reason, the Board of Elections should be able to provide you with an ID. I don't think that's too far fetched. And I think if we're spending money, millions of dollars in Africa on gender studies and giving people free crack pipes, we could give people a free voter ID at the Board of Elections.
You know what, Mark? What I just thought just came to my mind is, here I am interviewing somebody from New York, running for office in New York, and most of America thinks that everybody in New York is a liberal Democrat like AOC, and you are proving to our country that there is hope for New York. There are people who actually are reasonable thinking, conservative minded individuals that are not a left-leaning communist believing a politician.
Yeah, it's weird because
I'm making that dichotomy for a purpose there.
I was reaching. There was people that I was reaching out to my first year running for office, and I talked about interviewing with them on their whatever, and the person says to me, "Yeah, but I'm a conservative. Like they're a conservative." I was like, "Yeah, I know. Like, what do you think I'm reaching out to you for? Like,
Right.
like why would you like?" And people think, another friend of mine was in New York and she said that she didn't, doesn't have the passport because they require passports in place. I said, neither do I. I know the places in New York that don't require it because they're not communist. I'm obviously not, whatever. So it's a lot of people have their like, yeah, it's marked for New York. That obviously I put in my bio, I'm a conservative Republican. It's not like, it's weird how people just think New York is like 100% of people aren't Republican. Some people have that mindset. It's just extremely weird that
So
people
what
think
part
that
of
way.
So again, what part of New York are you from again? Where you live?
I'm from Brooklyn. South Brooklyn is, the closest thing to, Staten Island is red. They voted. That's the one Congress member we have, Nicole Maliotakis, and it was Democrat the 2 years prior to her running, but that's just because we didn't have a strong Republican candidate. We did have one before that, and Michael Grimm, but he got taken down with this nonsensical charge. That's a long story in itself. He was the only Republican Congress member in all 5 boroughs. So of course he was attacked by the media nonstop, and eventually they took him down for, he had this, it's a quick, the short story of it is he owned the restaurant. He had a business partner. His business partner paid employees off the books, which a lot of restaurants do. You pay your delivery drivers and bus boys cash or whatever. Like, it goes on pretty much in half the businesses in New York City. But they brought him on like 13 counts of tax evasion or whatever, making, that's what it says on the media. But the true story of it was something minor like that, where he wasn't even the active manager in the business. He was a silent partner, and he goes to jail for that. So we lost a great Congress member in Michael Grimm, and then that followed up with somebody who really wasn't a strong Republican candidate, who kind of took over, got the endorsement of Trump and everything, but it wasn't enough because he just wasn't a strong candidate. So
Well,
yeah.
let's talk about you a little bit.
Yep.
I think that it's interesting because here you are, Republican, actually running statewide office, running against Chuck Schumer, who's up for re-election, of course,
Mhm.
and you're meeting. I mean, like, you're meeting not just the people in your area or the boroughs around you, but you're running for a statewide office. From what I hear, that people outside of the New York area are generally conservative minded in New
Yep.
York, like yourself.
Yeah, that's
And
the other thing. New York City is blue as a Smurf, but the New York
or my
State.
shirt, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, New York State, Trump got 42% of the vote in New York in 2020. That's not,
Yeah,
that's not completely impossible to think that
right.
we can't pick up, 8 points in the last 2 years. Trump, we had the lockdowns in 2020, but we didn't have the mandates. And the mandates are making a lot of Democrats wake up and start voting Republican. So, and a lot of these rallies I go to, the Democrats, they're independents. They, I call it the hokey pokey because of social media. If you say the V word, you get censored, just like election fraud. And I say the hokey pokey because you put your right arm out, you take the hokey pokey, and it turns your DNA around, and that's what it's all about. So, so yeah.
That's interesting. I like that. Well, and what's funny, like you said, is that people don't realize how many are are conservative or Republican in New York. It shows the importance of our electoral college on a nation. If we had an electoral college in each state, we would probably end up having more Republican people in office in each state, simply because the population centers like New York would not control the vote for the whole state. And that's like I said, that's the beauty of our electoral college, that our country isn't being run by Democrats in New York, Democrats in California, Democrats in Illinois. It's being run by an average vote, which is what the electoral college does, which would be great if we had on a state level.
Well, not only the Electoral College, but when you talk about the U.S. Senate, our founding fathers saw that as well. And that's the checks and balances with that. When you come to, the amount of Congress members that you have in each state is based on population, but every state has 2 senators. So even if you are from a state that doesn't have a large population, you have 2 senators, and it has to pass the House and the Senate. So even if you have large populations in New York, California, Illinois, with a large portion of Democrat Congress members, though, our Senate is still only 2. So our Senate vote accounts exactly the same as Texas's Senate or smaller states,
Exactly.
Kentucky or whatever the case may be.
And that's the beauty of it, which we go into later. But let's talk more about you, Mark,
Yep.
because with you running for Senate, as we talked about in the beginning, if people feel like they like you and they want to support you, they can go to your website. We've got your website scrolling. But more importantly, I tell people, I said, this is a way for people all over the country to help, maybe turn a state red in this case. If people helped you, they could help turn a state red or have us have another Republican senator. And look, and even though I don't like to get as partisan on my show, I do believe that our country's in trouble, and it seems that the Republic that people on the right have more of a conservative-minded voice, which is what we need in our country, because the Democrats are running up that national debt, and
Yep.
we got to get new
Money grows
Republicans.
on trees mentality.
Exactly, because a lot of we have Republicans that aren't voting the right way either. So
Yep.
whether it's Republican or Democrat, we just need fresh people with fresh ideas going in there, flushing out the bad elected officials with new ideas that are going to help our country fiscally most primarily. What about I'm seeing on your site big tech free speech censorship. Let's go through these things and let's not go into too much detail, but let's kind of talk about some of these things.
Yeah, I spoke with like Congresswoman Tenney in New York, and they're trying to get rid of Section 230. Obviously, we're in a minority in Congress and the Senate, but if we do take the majority back, it's really time to get to work and get rid of some of these issues, like giving these tech companies like Facebook and YouTube censoring free speech. It's a they try to they're not publishers. This is a public platform, almost the same way as a telephone is at this point. Everyone communicates now on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. They censored a sitting president of the United States. Like, how is anyone, like, whether you hate the person or not, how is anyone okay with that? But then you have Taliban terrorists and stuff not censored. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, to your point, on one hand, I hate saying devil's advocate, but that they say, okay, Facebook, YouTube, they're all private companies, so they can have their rules and they can be able to censor you based on what they don't want on their platform. However, the way I feel about it is, if they're going to allow, like you said, Taliban to come on there and have their word, well, then now they're crossing the line. Now they are opening the door, to cross the line between a private company and becoming a more political company.
Yeah, it's political partisanship when it shouldn't be. Like, you can't.
Exactly.
They even had with the lawsuit, Candace Owens sued the fact checkers, and then they came and said the fact checkers are opinions on, like, so if they're opinions, then they're not fact checkers, and how are they censoring? If it's an opinion, then it's biased. Like, where is this coming along? Like, how are we justifying this? It's
Yeah,
like,
and not to mention that, like, Facebook has been shown to be making major donations to the Democrat Party.
yep.
So if they're going to be doing that and it's showing they're one sided, then they're not being equal sided or fair for everybody to have free speech. So that's
Other countries, I don't remember the details, but like Poland, I'm Polish by ethnicity. They take their fight against Facebook. I think they get fined for certain things, or I think they're attacking Russia now by getting rid of certain companies in Russia, which the joke was that they're getting rid of Facebook and they're getting rid of McDonald's, so people will be talking to each other and eating healthy. Like, how's that a bad? How are you punishing Russia with that? So,
let's go to make it clear that mandates for medical procedures, vaccines, are not allowed anywhere in the U.S. Coercion is not consent.
yeah, basically, I mean, we're seeing it not only in New York but across the country. Companies are firing people for not taking the hokey pokey, and it's completely wrong. It's
Yeah.
coercion is not consent. Like they want to say, oh well, we're not forcing you. You're basically saying that if you're not, if you're not giving, if you're not taking it, your livelihood is over with. Like that's not consent. It's coercion, and coercion is not consent. And we need to make the mandates illegal, across the country. I mean, it's already, I believe, should be unconstitutional. I know different courts have ruled differently on individual cases, so there's no clear cut answer with that. Well, there should be. There's also Nuremberg Code, which prevents these experimental shots from being forced on people. And it's just completely wrong, and we need to make that clear as day that no local, state, or federal elected official has the right to do any type of these mandates or lockdowns. I mean, how is New York? The mandates just ended in New York City as far as going indoors to restaurants, and they're losing a lot of money from tourism and stuff. There's a lot of businesses in New York State that went out of business because of these statewide lockdowns, and then those that survived had to restrict their customer base to only people that took the hokey pokey, and then they have to hire somebody else to be like a bouncer and argue with people about the shot. Nobody wants to do that. Like, especially customers that have been coming there the whole time. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you do you have your paper? Show me your papers. Like,
Your papers, please. Right.
yeah, I have no problem. I was outside the Barclays Center at the Kyrie Irving protest that we did last year during the first day of the Brooklyn Nets game, and I had no problem standing by the ticket entrance. Where they're checking tickets and they're checking the passport. It's like, show your Nazi passport. Only people with the Nazi passport are allowed inside. Make sure you show your papers. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's all for your safety. Sure, and I kept repeating it on the megaphone,
Right.
and I got creative with it, but basically, and you can see the look of shame on people's faces, because it's like they know that there's something wrong with this. How could you not think that there's something wrong with the concept of showing that you got an experimental drug injected
And
into
what's
you?
interesting is that not only is it a way to shame people, but it also ends up like I've seen people that have either religious exemption or they've taken they have a negative COVID test to be able to get into things. Then they have to wear another color wristband, or they have to wear another
Yep.
color badge, and it's another way to mark them. And I'm somebody who says, look, I'm not against vaccines. If somebody wants to get the vaccine, that's their free will.
Yeah.
That's freedom to do so. I'm just against the mandates, and I'm glad that you're against mandates too, because that would mean that we have somebody in our national government, in the Senate, that does something to fight against a mandate that closes business, gets people fired, isolates people, but also discriminates against people. And we have to be against all forms of discrimination, even if we don't agree with it. We have to be against discrimination, and I'm glad that this is something where you stand on, because this is also a way of being against discrimination. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to bring up a point. In
Sure.
the movie Philadelphia, which is based on a true story, Tom Hanks was fired for being for having AIDS. So you're basically discriminating not on disability, but based on medical status. And he won his lawsuit in real life. And this is the same thing. You're being discriminated based on a medical status because you didn't take a medical procedure or something. It's basically along the same lines. The problem with this is the government is passing the liability on to private companies to enforce this. So when it comes time to sue people, private businesses will go out of business from all these lawsuits, even if they win, and everyone will cheer like, yeah, these evil corporations. And then next thing you know, it's still a step towards communism if private businesses are going out of business for enforcing something that the government was kind of forcing them to do, because Joe Biden says that this is a mandate for employees that have 200 or more people, or Governor Kathy Hochul or Mayor Adams all said that this is what the business has to do. And the next thing you know, these businesses are all getting sued. It's
It's
like a double-edged sword. and a win-win situation for people that are trying to implement communism. So,
but what's interesting, and to your point is, even though we're not against vaccine, we're against the mandate part of it. The federal government gets involved, and they scare enough people. News stories scare enough people that it makes a lot of people fearful, and they're more vested in that everybody should be vaccinated for their safety. When the reality is, Congress is making money off of it because
yep.
the federal government is paying for the vaccines. They're printing the money, and they're going to pass it on to us in the form of taxes later. Meanwhile,
Well,
members of
the
Congress,
invisible tax of inflation, because we're printing more money and it
correct,
devalues our currency. So we're paying for it if it's not just in tax dollars, but by devaluing our currency as well and
and
causing
meanwhile,
hyperinflation, which we're seeing right now. These free shots are not free. The
right,
pharmaceutical companies are making money, and the Congress members are making money from insider trading,
exactly,
which
exactly
I've
what I
been
was going
I've been
to say.
pointing out since last year. And I've been, I tweet about it every now and then. I don't have that many followers, but I tag people, I DM people. I started seeing, Tommy Lahren on Fox Nation a few weeks after I, put it out there that, insider trading, it's still a crime. You have the Stock Act of 2012 that passed during the Obama administration, which stands for Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge. It's insider trading regardless. It's a federal crime. You didn't need a congressional bill to tell Congress members that they can't trade on inside information. That's already illegal before the bill was written
And
and
what
passed.
and the best point about all this is, like I said, not only the Congress members getting rich off of it, the pharmaceutical companies are getting rich off of it, and the scare tactics are making everybody buy into it and look the other way because they want to worry about their health and safety instead of, if we all just united on freedom. People who, if we respected freedom, if our elected officials respected freedom, and we said, look, you might, if you agree and you want to get the vaccine, get it. If you don't agree, don't get it. But we're going to respect freedom, and that would be something where everybody wins on that. But I want
This was a marketing strategy from the begin with. You had to wait your turn to get it. Only people of this age, then only people of that age, then only people of that age. And then once everyone was like waiting, like, oh, I could get it now, I'm eligible. And then then they started incentivizing people, giving $100, giving
yeah,
free food, giving all that. Then once they had enough percentage of people that took it, then they start putting in forcing people. And when they do that, then there's over half the population, over 60% of the population that's like, it's not my problem. I don't care
right.
because I
So
have it.
I want to get through your list here because I have other questions to
Yep.
ask you,
Sure.
because I really want people to get to know you,
Yep.
Mark, because I think that if you've got a shot here, which it sounds like you do, you could be somebody that changes not only the way New York votes, but be somebody that helps the whole country in the Senate. So support educational overhaul, including encouraging vocational training, giving parents more flexibility. What's that about?
Well, on my local elections, I believed in life skills classes because, we used to have, before my time, shop classes in school where people
Mhm.
learn basic skills
Absolutely.
and home ec.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
nowadays you have adults that don't know how to change a tire or even boil water, which is real. People don't know how to boil
Right,
water. It's like
I agree
the
with you, right.
concept of turning on the stove. It's like they're a caveman with fire or something. It's like, it makes no sense. And that goes to confidence. It's like people don't have confidence in themselves, so they'll just pay somebody else to do something that's an extremely simple task. And that goes with politics too, like filing with the FEC. There's people that pay people $5,000 to file with the FEC. It took me 5 minutes to do it myself online to become a candidate. So this concept is overwhelming of somebody running for office. But since I ran for office the last 2 years, and then like nothing tends to overwhelm me. Like I just go and I research things myself and I figure it out. I became a stockbroker at the age of 19. I taught myself how, and I passed the Series 7 in less time than people, with college degrees and master's degrees that took a year and a half in some cases. And in my firm, I was the youngest stockbroker in my firm at age 19. So
Is that what
things
you do
don't,
for a living?
I'm sorry.
Is that what you do for a living? You're a stockbroker?
Well, I was a stockbroker, then a financial advisor. Then I left financial services, and I kind of juggled being. I kept my insurance license since 2005, relatively active. So I'm an independent broker for life insurance and disability insurance. I could have made a killing on life insurance with the fear mongering of COVID, but instead I ran for office to try to help people and work for free the past 2 years. So I've been losing a lot of money doing this. So if I go back to financial services full time, or I became a truck driver right before the pandemic, and I only did it for about 3 months just because I wanted to get paid to travel the country and learn another skill because it's a recession proof industry. And even communist countries need truck drivers. So I knew I'd always have job security if I had that skill in hand. But going back to speaking of skills, the life skills classes in schools was a local idea, teaching financial literacy, learning how credit works, learning how checking accounts work, learning how the basics of investing, learning the basics of designing a website. These are classes that would be one day, one semester, and each class, is whatever length it is, 45 minutes. You could have somebody come in and talk about like the basics of electrical wiring, like splicing two wires together. Maybe that intrigues somebody and they want to go to a trade school and learn how to be an electrician.
Well,
Or, you know,
and here's something I definitely agree with you on. I always say that one of the biggest problems in our country is a lot of schools started taking out shop out of
yeah,
class. They started taking
yeah,
out basic skills out of school, and instead they started pushing education that everybody needs to go to college to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. And there's some people who that's just not their, it's not so much not their skill set, it's not their desire. And if we taught basic skills in school, some kids would go on to become electricians or plumbers or skilled laborers, and that is not only just as much needed in our communities in our country, to help build to give our country the skilled people that it needs to build things, to be able to
mhm.
create things, to be able to manufacture things.
You could
So
have an architect, engineer, but if there's no one to actually do the work, what are you building? Like,
right. I talk about this a lot on a state level here in Louisiana, but it's something that goes across our country. We farmed out, in our country, our manufacturing to other countries because we don't have as many skilled laborers as we did 100 years ago. And now look where we are now in manufacturing. Everybody wants to be the doctor, lawyer, engineer, and everyone wants to buy off of Amazon, but nobody wants to be the skilled person that makes things happen, that becomes that cog in the wheel. So to your point, I'm glad you did, but I'm moving us along because I got a lot of questions for you, Mark.
yep, no
Because I
problem.
really think I like your answers. Introduce legislation to prevent government employees from later taking jobs with companies that regulate, such as FDA employees.
Yeah, this is a big one that I bring up quite often because you have the reason why we have an opioid epidemic in this country is because of corruption like that. You had an FDA employee that approved oxycodone as less addictive than other pain medication because of its time release formula, and obviously we know that that's a lie. It was approved by the FDA, that statement. A lot of doctors bought the fake science that was being pitched to them by the pharmaceutical companies, um, and they ended up causing that. And then a year later, that person in the FDA gets a job with Purdue Pharma, which is the manufacturer of oxycodone, and makes millions of dollars. So it's not technically pay to play, but it is. We know 2 + 2 is 4, and that's exactly what this is. It's pretty obvious. So I believe that if you work for a government agency like the FDA, you should not be able to work for the big pharma or be a representative for the dairy workers or whatever the case may be. If you're approving food, pharmaceuticals, whatever the case may be, the corporations that you regulate, you should not be able to get a job with them for at least 5 years. And it
It's
goes,
another way. It's another way to help regulate the bureaucracy in our country. That is the bureaucracies that are growing in our country that are really what's hurting our country behind the scenes. And
yep.
so that I like that.
It's
Um,
not just the FDA and SEC and working for a financial institution, and the list goes on. But that's the biggest example because, I mean, we would not have an opioid crisis if it wasn't for something simple like that being put in. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or communist. You could agree that that makes sense. It's very hard to find somebody that doesn't agree with that.
I like this nonpartisanship things. Some of these ideas that you have are kind of nonpartisan. They kind of work on both sides of the fence to help both people. Talked about the regulate bank overdraft fees. You brought this up earlier.
Yeah, and another thing that I wanted to do on the state level, I was going to call it the New York Fair Banking Act, even though that wasn't a priority. It was going to be the first bill that I passed because it's also pointing out people who are in the banking committee that, if they don't put that to the floor to the vote, then you have to out them and contact their constituents and say, okay, these are Democrats, but if they're for the people, how does this make sense that you're not for regulating bank overdraft fees? I was a financial advisor for the largest bank in the world at the time, according to market capitalization at the time. I don't want to give them a free plug, but probably imagine one of the evil banks out there, you name it. They were making more money off of somebody that is broke, basically has direct deposit, pays several overdraft fees a year, maybe has a credit card with a small balance that they're paying a 24% interest on, than somebody that has six figures in a checking account earning no interest. And if you look at it, if you go over by $10 and you pay a $35 overdraft fee, and the next day your direct deposit hits just because of this miscalculation or whatever the case may be, you paid a 350% daily interest, which is the equivalent of over 100,000% APR, because 350 times 365, I think 132,000. I have it on my website, the exact number. But that's the percentage of an APR because your daily interest rate is 350%. And that's not the major problem. The major problem that's even worse than that is they're intentionally making, like, if you buy a coffee with your debit card, or buy a soda or whatever the case may be, these small transactions, they stay pending on your account for several days. So they come out of your available balance, but what happens is you go over by $10, and then that coffee comes in later, even though it happened before.
Right.
It comes in later because of a pending transaction. So you'll get 4 overdraft fees for $35 each and pay $140, when in reality you went over by less than $20. So what I wanted to do was make it, a 50% maximum of what you go over with a maximum of $35. So if you go over by 100, then you're still only paying 35. But if you go over by 10, you're paying 5. And so there's still some type of fee, but it's not excessive to the point where you're just completely abusing and taking advantage of people.
No, I certainly get the point, and I love the idea because nowadays all these different companies want you to do everything, not only direct deposit but auto pay, set up an account to auto pay, and then if the month is a 28-day month instead of a 31-day month, it might throw it off, throw their algorithm. I say their algorithm, but their computer.
Yeah, a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, and they're paying overdraft fees galore. So.
Right. I like the idea. I'm interrupting you only because I got a bunch of questions, Mark. I'm really enjoying. It's funny because you've got, and this is just, sometimes I speak in the obvious, but you've got a very stoic or very stern personality, but that's your New York personality. But you sound like what's unusual that people aren't used to hearing in a New Yorker. People expect these New Yorkers to be these liberal-minded, people, but and your personality doesn't necessarily match your beliefs, and your beliefs don't match up with what people's perceptions of New York would be. And I'm enjoying bringing out all of your beliefs because I think that when people across America see that, hey, we got somebody who's really different here, who's not the norm, so to speak, that they're going to really, get into this. They're going to like meeting you more and hearing more about you. So I want to make sure we get a lot of this stuff out. How'd you like that?
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I mean, I think one of the reasons is, as I mentioned earlier, I became a stockbroker at the age of 19, so I didn't go to an indoctrination camp like a lot of liberal New Yorkers do. And I was speaking about this earlier. Like, I campaign in the projects in Coney Island, and one of the ideas that's not listed on the website because it's a local issue, is lease to own for people who live in the projects, because they're basically, they have to meet their income requirements regularly. If they make too much money, then they can no longer live there, or pay the same rent anymore. So basically, I want to implement that if you've been there for at least 5 years, you have an option to pay a little bit more monthly, but then after 15 years, you own the unit. You can't sell it at market value. You still have to, do a lease to own option or sale to people who have income requirements, but it also removes the income restriction for that person, because the biggest segregation in our country now is putting minorities in the projects in areas that they can't get out of, and those are that's done by design by the Democrats a
I
very
agree.
long time ago,
I agree
and they're
100.
trapped.
I agree 100%. A lot of these a lot of the Democrat programs trap people in their own poverty. They feed them just enough scraps to keep them down. They don't create policy. They create policies that will keep people trapped in poverty and keep people trapped, and they'll create policies that keep people trapped on these programs, but they don't create policies that will help them get out of poverty. Mark, that is one of the greatest ideas I've heard you say tonight yet, which is that you have a plan to help people get out of poverty that are trapped in these Democrat programs, these Democrat, housing buildings, that are keeping them down. Thank you very much for coming up with that idea. That's a great idea. I'm moving to the next question, though. Make several improvements to our healthcare system.
Yeah, that's a little bit in depth. The old website, mark the number 4ny.com, goes into that. It's kind of a middle ground, which obviously what we have now isn't working, and Medicare for all is a completely stupid idea. It's another money grows on trees mentality. So this is a middle ground, which would actually somewhat implement a universal healthcare system, but it would be something that wouldn't drastically increase taxes. It would be kind of like a catastrophic plan for all. So the way it would work is there would be a high 50% co-insurance with a 10,000 annual cap. So an insurance policy like that wouldn't cost a lot of money for people, but it would also be a situation where if somebody did, have a major procedure, they're only on the line for $10,000, and that doesn't put them in debt for the rest of their lives or force them to go into bankruptcy. And the way that this would be paid for is through a slight corporate tax increase. Trump already lowered the corporate income tax, so we could raise the corporate income tax a small amount. I don't know. I'd have to actually consult with actuaries to find out what the exact numbers would be. But the increase in taxes that corporations would be paying, they'd be saving in healthcare expenses, because they could still provide better insurance for their employees, but their insurance would cover like a supplemental plan that would cover the other 50% co-insurance, which is significantly less than buying a regular policy that covers all of it. So I don't know if you follow me on that, but
I was getting ready to say it is a mouthful and a mindful, but I kind of get the sentiment for it, so I want to hear more about that later, I guess.
yeah. So, but basically, everyone would have some type of insurance, and if you work for a company, then they would provide you insurance, but the companies are basically paying less for the insurance because everyone has like this base catastrophic policy. And like I said, I have my life and health insurance since 2005. It's something that I understand, but I also have to crunch the actual numbers with actuaries. But what was wrong with Obamacare is they added pre-existing conditions, which sounds nice because you feel bad for people that have pre-existing conditions, but what that is called adverse selection in the insurance business, because you're forcing somebody to insure people who aren't healthy, and then the people who are healthy have no motivation to buy insurance because they could just buy it any time when they're, if they're not healthy. And aside from that, if you were too broke to afford insurance, you paid a penalty. And even though Trump got rid of that aspect of Obamacare, it hasn't been rid of on the corporate side. So the corporations that don't provide insurance for their employees are still paying penalties. So Obamacare was one of the worst legislations that we've ever
So
seen,
what?
and it drastically increased the cost of insurance for everybody. And there was no, it's politicians that don't understand insurance should have nothing to do with
With
legislation
doing
that involves
legislation.
insurance.
I agree 100%. So what about health savings accounts? 'Cause I really like the idea of health savings accounts. You've talked about that. What's interesting is you bring up something unique, which is a catastrophic plan for everybody, which I was kind of like trying to get grasp onto. But if we attach that to some sort of personal responsibility where people have to have a health savings account, now they're personally responsible for their everyday type medical stuff. And you're saying that the government becomes responsible for more of a catastrophic thing, kind of like our flood insurance program is. Our flood insurance program and FEMA, those are two separate programs, I know, but they're more of a catastrophic plan. But if we have health savings accounts attached to this new medical plan you're talking
Yeah,
about,
well, everyone could have the option to pay for a supplemental plan that cover, because Medicare for all is 80%, 80/20, 80% covered by Medicare, 20% by you. So but with this it's 50%. So the co-insurance is significantly higher. So what that does is it deters people from going to the emergency room for having a cold, because they'd pay a large co-insurance. It's not like but it also gives somebody some type of coverage as opposed to nothing, and that coverage is significantly less expensive than
okay,
a Medicare for all plan, and people could still buy the supplemental coverage that covers the 50%. And
all right,
employers would save a lot of money, so they'd be paying a little bit more in corporate taxes, and they
I'm
could still provide the supplemental plans for their employees.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point. And I'm glad you reiterated it because it kind of ties that loop up. So we move to this next one: make it illegal for businesses and other organizations to discriminate based on political ideology.
Yeah,
Any,
we have people who are afraid to speak out because of their job, and they're afraid to use their First Amendment right to free speech because they might get fired. And we've had that happen, especially nowadays. Oh, you're a Trump supporter, then they find a way to fire you or retaliate. So that's a discrimination that's not protected, and it should be protected because your free speech. You shouldn't be afraid to, what, even if you're a communist. I mean, communists were attacked a long time ago. Obviously, I don't agree with communism, but we still do have a First Amendment for a reason.
and we have
And so if somebody's a communist, they should not be denied a job.
I
You
tell
know,
everybody, look, I'm a freedom liberty guy. I may not agree with your freedoms and the liberties or the way you choose to live your life, but I agree with the freedom that you have the freedom to do so. And I will always support freedom, even if I disagree with it. Because if you give people that level of respect and you respect each other's freedoms, then you can always find things that you can unite on without having to give up your freedoms or your beliefs.
yeah.
There's always things that we can unite on to be able to bring more people together to solve the real problems like our national debt. Tax credits for organ donors to reduce waiting list for organs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't want to. A lot of people don't want to put down that they're an organ donor because they're afraid for several reasons. There's people who feel like if they get into a car accident, they won't be resuscitated, so that their organs could be used to save little Timmy in the hospital or whatever. And that's why we have a shortage of organ donors, a large waiting list. If everyone was an organ donor, hypothetically, then you wouldn't have waiting lists. But I'm not suggesting that everyone mandatory become an organ donor. Obviously, that would not be a good. People have their religious reasons and things
Right.
of that nature. So it would be a tax credit for the people that want to do it, even if it's just $10 a year, whether it's state or federal. A $10 tax credit, people will go and do and say, you know what, I'll be an organ donor, or they get $10 extra every year for the rest of their life, and they're probably not going to die, and they're helping probably save a life if they die, then I think it will motivate. It's not going to make everyone do it, but if it increases 20% of the population, that will drastically decrease the waiting list that we have for organs.
Mark, that's an interesting idea. I kind of like that tax credit idea.
And people, I just want to say, because one of the arguments, oh, people have their religious beliefs and stuff. It's like, yeah, and people have their religious beliefs that they don't want to work on Sunday, and that's fine, but you won't get paid on Sunday either. So
Right.
you have the option to get this money if you want to do it, and if you don't want to do it, then don't do it.
I like the plan. Minimum staffing requirements in hospitals and nursing homes to prevent negligent deaths, injuries, and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem in nursing homes and hospitals where they're drastically understaffed, and people die as a result of it. There's suffering, there's neglect. The elderly are treated horrible in nursing homes and hospitals across the country, and not just elderly people. It's just they're short staffed, and minimum staffing requirements. People object that the hospitals need to make money if they pay enough people to, there needs to be a complete healthcare overhaul in many different aspects, but hospitals should be required to have a minimum staff on hand at all times, or get fined, or at least schedule a minimum staffing. Like, people call out sick, things happen, that's understandable, but the scheduling needs to be minimum staffing requirements. And I don't want to get into personal too much, but my mother did die last year in August, and I still continued to campaign afterwards. But that was a very abusive situation in the hospital, and it was a result of neglect from the hospital. And I can't say too much about that, but
Well, Mark, my condolences for that. I know how hard that is, and I'm sorry to hear about that. But what I'd like to point out, that because of that scenario, you may be able to save somebody else's mother, having that passion to think of this idea. And like all these ideas, what I'm liking about talking with you about these ideas is, even though some of them you don't have actual plans for, the solutions, a lot of them you do, of course, but it shows what's in your heart, and it shows what's on your mind, and it shows what you're gonna bring to the Senate floor to help everyday Americans.
yeah, there's problem solving abilities for issues that haven't even come up yet. That I tend to think of things
Yeah, gives
rather quickly. Like, municipal bonds to fund affordable housing was another local issue, but that could be done across the state too. It's not on the federal website, but if you have a vacant parking lot like we had in Coney Island, you could fund municipal bonds, which are tax-free bonds issued by the city. I'm not going to get into markforny.com. My old website gets into details on that. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, it costs $100 million to build this building with affordable housing, ground level commercial real estate, underground multi-level parking. You get out municipal bonds for $200 million. So now you have another $100 million in assets that you could use to rebuild a park or do whatever with that money to benefit the city. And by the time the bonds mature in 15 years, that $100 million property would be worth hopefully more than that $200 million. And then you could sell to repay the principal of the municipal bonds, and you would be paying the interest of those municipal bonds from the rent roll from the commercial real estate, the parking lot, and the rent from the affordable housing units in the building. So that's something else that I thought of when it came to generating revenue, as opposed to just taxing and fining people. That's a way to generate revenue and create affordable housing at the same time.
I like that thinking, because our federal government needs more business-minded people in there, because all they believe that the federal government's way of getting money is to tax people
Yep.
and print it. Whereas, if they thought of things like this that would actually bring money in to the federal government, we could solve a lot of problems. The only problem is when elected officials get more money coming in, they find more bridges to nowhere to build. But with your kind of thinking, coupled with other people around the country being more active on a fiscal level, be more fiscally conservative, we can stop some of those spending practices and be able to create more opportunities that not only bring the government money, but
when you had the Chicago fire, over 100 years ago, or whatever the case may be, it was private money that rebuilt the city of Chicago. People have no problem, but instead of just the solution is tax billionaires that are going to either leave your state or leave your country to avoid the
pass the
taxes.
cost on to the consumer.
Yeah, you basically could just there's the business owner, rich people are looking to invest in different things, so you could have rich people invest into the communities as opposed to just the solution to everything is tax them.
I like that idea. Tax credits for organic farmers to make healthier food more affordable.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. I think whatever the tax credit dollar amount would be, to try to people want to eat healthier, but organic foods is extremely expensive. So if you motivate people to farm organically as opposed to other methods with a lot of these chemicals in our food, then maybe they'll be more motivated to, if it costs them the same amount of money to farm organically as it does to farm, using the pesticides and all that case, then they're probably more motivated to do that. So if the government could bridge the gap so our food could be healthier and people could eat healthier, I think that's important, because we have that goes back to the FDA thing. There's a lot of things that are approved by the FDA in our country that are not approved in other countries, and that has to do with saving money for these big corporations. And there's corruption in that aspect too.
And what I like about this idea, you might not solve the problem to be able to have healthier food, but in the process, you might be able to solve the problem that the FDA is proving things that maybe aren't healthy, or just in general bring more of a health awareness to our food, across the country. I'm going to bring up the last one you've got, and there's some more questions for you after these. We talk about your talking points. Fight for term limits in office. If you're elected, you'll pledge to serve no more than 2 terms. That's an interesting.
Yeah, I think there's another Congress member, Billy Prempa, who's running for Jersey. He has a 8-10-12 plan, which is very similar to mine, which is 8 years president, which we already have, 10 years in Congress, which is 5 2-year terms, and Senate 2 6-year terms.
Love it.
The Senate is 6-year terms as it is now. I think 12 years is more than enough time to do what you need to do. Mm-hmm. And then, we need to end career politicians for several reasons. But one is, if you're a career politician your whole life, you're more likely to be corrupt and bought out the longer that you're there. And number two, our founding fathers did not mean for people to become career politicians. And we also have too many lawyers that are politicians. Like, that's not, the people who have never worked in the private sector, that don't understand people. And a lot of them are like becoming politicians as like in a career advancement. Like, you become a lawyer and then the next step is run for office and be the legislator. That's not, we need business minded people. We need other people in office, and not just a field of lawyers out there. So
I like that you brought up Billy Premp. I want to interview him. I've talked to him already. His friend, is it David Herrera? Nope. I got it wrong. It is, David Herrera. A friend of his is going to be on my show also. I don't know if you heard of him. He's actually running for council in New Jersey. So that, he's friends with Billy Premp, I think. And we've got that. And then we also have I interviewed a candidate out in Washington earlier who's just a regular guy, who's just another one of those just regular guys, regular businessman. He's a die cast maker, and like to your point, when you listen to just the average guys, the people that have been working in amongst other people in our communities and doing the average Joe's work, so to speak. Some of those guys have some of the best ideas, because they have experience, they have real life experience. And
Yeah, and I've worked in so many different fields. Like I said, the financial services, insurance, real estate, entertainment with local cable TV show for many years, and so I have a lot of different skills. Truck driver was the most recent one because I wanted to travel to see the country and get paid to do so. So I don't fly anymore. So I haven't flown since January of 2020 because I'll get paid to travel to a destination.
we're going to talk about that some more in a minute. I got some other
Yeah.
ideas for you.
Yeah.
Because I have a whole.
I just won't wear masks on a plane. That's my point. But
I love it. No, I absolutely love it. So, because I've got a few more questions to ask you that I think are real important, and this is going to start finishing up our interview here because we're already on here for an hour or about hour and 10 minutes.
Yep.
And and I want people to really get a chance to know you, which I think they have with a lot of these questions I've asked you from your own website, which they can read about more on your site at the site that's scrolling across the bottom of the screen. But what would be the first thing that you would do if you got in the Senate? What would be the first action that you would take if you got into the Senate?
I think the most important thing for me is the mandates. And if there's any mandates anywhere in the country, whether it's employers or whatever the case may be, or, these passport concepts or anything like that, that's the most important thing for me. I would actually vote for a Democrat that's against the mandates over a Republican that is for the mandates. We don't have any Republicans that are for the mandates that I know of. Maybe there are some that are just quiet about it because they're corrupt.
Yeah,
or whatever,
I was sometimes being complicit with what's going on.
They're not outspoken about it, but if they're asked, they're not going to say that they're for it. They could be corrupt and complicit with it, not really fighting for it. So that would be holding to the feet to the fire with all the rhinos. Because if I win the Senate, then there should be a good chance that we have a majority again.
You want to retire Chuck Schumer. So what's the second thing you want to do? What's your next passionate thing you want to do if you get to the Senate?
I think the voter integrity reform. I know Trump wanted to pass that in 2018, and we slept on it when we had the majority before we lost it, and he warned people about it. So the voter ID is one of the aspects. So I think voter integrity. I know there's the company Paper Vote that talks about blockchain voting systems, and the voter ID that I mentioned earlier. I think we need to basically cement the integrity of our elections. And the question that I'm asked more than the question I'm asked most often is, how do you say your last name? But aside from that, the question I'm asked is, what is the point of voting if they're stealing elections? And number one, if you stay home, then they win legitimately, and you can't prove election fraud, and we will never win an election again. Because if they win elections legitimately now, they will make sure, if we go and ask for an audit on an election that was won legitimately, we are going to look like fools. And if they win legitimately because everyone stays home, then they're going to pass all of the things that they're, the mail-in voting, like California and stuff. Like California is a lost cause, I think. And people think New York is a lost cause, but we're not there yet. If we re-elect the governor this year, it is over for New York. And leaving New York is not the answer, because it's going to spread. It's not going to stop in New York. Florida is red, but it's more purple than it is red, and we could lose Florida eventually too. So don't think that it's not a possibility. Escaping to Florida is the answer. People run until it's eventually when we lose the country, it's all over. So New York it's not going to stop with New York. So as much as I'd like to leave to Florida or a red state and enjoy freedom and not deal with the way it is in New York. New York is really the battleground right now. It's the financial capital of the world. We need to take New York State back. Otherwise, the rest of the states will follow. We can't have a governor in New York State that's corrupt like Hochul or Cuomo, who are tyrants. for another 4 years. We lost the mayor race, which I kind of figured we were going to lose, but we can't lose the governor race. And I think the governor race and all the statewide races, including the U.S. Senate seat, are winnable. So,
look, I love the fact that you're on election integrity, about especially when it pertains to the election crime that took place in 2020. I think that's very important because, I have Republican friends that ignore the last election. They say, oh, it wasn't stolen. It was, it's just that Trump wasn't a good candidate or whatever. But when you look at the mail-in ballots that went in, when you look at the data,
see that all of them were for Biden.
All for Biden.
These boxes that arrived later, they're all for Biden. None were for Trump. You see the march and the voting stops in the middle of the night, and then all of a sudden there's this massive surge.
And
it's common sense, people.
They rationalize it that it was, just that more Democrats vote mail-in ballots than Republicans. When you look at
there were no creases in the mail-in ballots. How is that physically possible? You have to fold it to put it in an envelope.
And if you look at statistics and you just do basic statistics, statistically impossible for that. But we go on and on for days. But the problem is people want to see it in a meme, but yet they want to joke about it. That they'll say, oh, well, the dead vote in Chicago, the dead vote here. There's always a little election fraud in election. But they don't want to admit that there's enough to overturn or make a direction go the other way. I'm with you. I think
I use the analogy, especially as a New Yorker, like I say, being a Republican in New York is kind of like being a Knicks fan. There's a lot of losses, and we haven't had a championship in a very long time. So we haven't had, Giuliani since the 90s, and Pataki, around that time as well, a little after that. But, that's the analogy that I use. But you also play to win the game. You still show up. It's not like you say, well, the other team is using steroids, and you talk to the ref and they don't care. Are you going to just go back to the locker room and not play? That's we have to win. We have to fight to win, because if we don't, then what are we doing? We're going to lose our country. Go out there and vote, and then if they stole the election, we fight to prove it. I understand 2020 didn't work out for us, but last year we took the Virginia governor race. No one thought that was going to happen.
Right.
They could have stole that election too. The topic is out there on election integrity, and people are skeptic about it, so they're less likely to cheat because they're more afraid of being caught now. Just like I said with my local election, the Board of Elections in New York City no longer allows people to do the online application at the Board of Elections. That's progress. Even though I lost my election, I prevented future fraud from happening because of that. So,
and the other thing to think about,
one aspect of fraud, there's plenty of ways to cheat, but I took away one of their tools.
And the other thing that I like to tell people that believe there's no election fraud, I said, well, look, let's just say that has never been election fraud. Wouldn't you like to secure our elections and make sure it doesn't happen again? Because the problem is this: if the other side, and look, it could be Democrats one time, Republicans the other, because I've always said that while everybody jokes about how the Democrats cheat, the Republican establishment has been complicit and has allowed it to happen. And if we don't demand auditable elections that are not only fair, but they're accessible to more people, we need to make our elections accessible to everyone that is eligible and legal to vote. We need to make them honest. We need to make them fair, but we need to make them accountable and auditable, so that way in the future we know our elections are secure, because the Democrats might be happy that the election went this way one time, but if people realize that they can steal an election, no matter whether they're Republicans, Democrats, communists, independents, whoever the party is, if they figure out how to steal an election, then we the people, all of us, no matter what party we are going to lose our freedoms, and we're going to lose our country. Yeah. And that's the point that I always make.
It happens with, it happens in communist countries like, Venezuela, where, the media says one thing, and even though most people don't agree with it, people think that, oh, because the media said it, this person actually won the election. And that's not necessarily true. More people don't agree with, the majority of people don't agree with the media narrative. People didn't really want communism over there, but since the media, but the stage protests
Right.
of people,
Yeah.
the paid protesters, all of this to create this
Yep.
fake outrage on things, and it's not really what's happening in the real world. But and then when the election happens one way, they think, oh well, that's how the majority of people feel, so what are we going to do? It's not the majority of people how they feel. And you take that with Trump, for example. 80, the amount of votes that he got should have been a landslide, but it wasn't, because we obviously know what really happened. And even in my election, I got more votes than any candidate, Republican or Democrat, in the history of the district, or the recent history of the district. If you look at the 2016 election, that the candidate that won and the Republican only got 34% of the vote, I got more votes than that candidate did in 2016. That Democrat candidate got a little over 21,000 votes. I got like a few hundred more than that. And that candidate won by a landslide, making the Republican only have 34%. So where these other like 8,000 more people voted in that small assembly district than they did before?
It's called
Probably,
ballot.
but probably not.
Well,
So,
it's ballot harvesting. I always tell people, I'm gonna say, make
well,
this thought.
ballot harvesting is legal in New York. So,
Is it really?
yeah,
Ballot harvesting is illegal now.
is legal.
Well, let me make the point. Ballot harvesting that I've been told is, when a ballot harvester goes in, finds the people who are not voting, uses their registrations to fill out mail-in ballots, and they'll fill them out. It's illegal, from what I understand, in our state, where a ballot harvester says, "Hey, these people aren't voting. Their registrations aren't being used. They're non-chronic. They're not using registration." They'll take those registrations, fill out mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, and they bring those in big boxes, and that's how they're getting votes for one.
Well, the way ballot harvesting, the legal aspect works in New York is you go knock on somebody's door, you tell them to vote for you, but instead of like trusting that they'll actually vote for you, you have them fill out the absentee ballot. And then the candidate, or literally anybody, could go to the Board of Elections and say, this person authorized me to pick up their ballot for them. And then you pick up the ballot for that person. Then you're supposed to go back to that person, and they're supposed to fill out their ballot, and then you mail it out for them, or you drop it in the drop box for them in the Board of Election site.
Basically,
Now,
it's the same process, same concept, just done a little bit differently. So we
yeah,
kind of
what would be illegal is if you filled out that ballot for the person, which is obviously a possibility, because somebody who normally doesn't vote goes and signs and authorizes me to pick up their absentee ballot for them. If I don't come back and bring it to them and have them actually fill it out, and I fill it out for them, and I vote for me and every Republican candidate, then how do you think they're going to follow up that person?
right, exactly. So
But that's cheating, and that's illegal.
Yep, I get you. So we both basically said the same thing. It's just done. The process was just done a little bit differently.
Yeah,
But
the legal aspect is you're supposed to bring the person signed, authorize you to get the ballot for them. You bring it back to them. They're supposed to fill it out. That's still considered ballot harvesting.
there's probably still some ballot harvesters that went, yeah, they told me I could pick up the ballot and they fill it out the way they want to fill it out, and
Yep.
that's how it happens. And I'm sure there's a lot of
And
voters.
you could have somebody who pretends to be a Republican that who's a Dem. Well, now I'm giving people ideas on how to cheat.
Yeah, let's not do that, because I want to make 2
Yeah.
points before I ask you my final question, so we can start wrapping this interview up. Because even though I could talk to you all night, I want to make this a podcast length to where we have it on the podcast. People are going to want to listen to the whole thing and hear about somebody who has a chance of beating Chuck Schumer in New York. You talked about well, not only ballot harvest, but before that, I have in Russia. You were talking about the people that are changing the narratives. We can look and see what's happening in Russia where Putin is saying to his people, hey, the reason we're going in the Ukraine is because we're saving them. And there's Nazis there that we're saving them from. So when the narratives come out to convince people that leaders are doing a certain thing right, that's what we would have to face if we keep allowing stolen elections in our own country, when we have leaders that change the narratives for people to believe that that leader is doing the right thing. The second thing you brought up, Venezuela, I interviewed yesterday a woman by the name of Carmen Montiel, Carmen Maria Montiel. She's running for Congress in Texas right now. I don't know if you met her or not, but she actually used to live in Venezuela, and she was in Venezuela up until she went to college, and she was Miss Venezuela actually at one time. And so she got to see Venezuela when it was at its greatness. And she left Venezuela to go to college, never came back, because while she was in college is when it fell, to communism. And she had some stories on the interview that we did on the downfall of not only Venezuela, but why she could never go back, and why she's fighting so hard for America, because she sees those same things happening here in America that happened in Venezuela, including election fraud, because she goes into that a little bit on how the elections in Venezuela were stolen using some of the same techniques that are happening here in America right now.
Yeah, I think they have voter ID there too, but that doesn't matter because you can still cheat.
Yeah, she kind of went through that a little bit. Mark, my last question actually, I'm going to make sure you have, I'm going to ask you my last question, but then after that, I want you to say some things if you have anything, final thoughts for people. But my last question that I ask everybody that I interview is, what makes America great? What unites us as a country? And what is that great thing that unites us as a country?
Well, we have, despite all the negativity that people who are brainwashed to hate our country, we have a constitution that was designed to withstand the test of time. Our founding fathers predicted times like this. That's why we have the Second Amendment, which protects all the other amendments. The Constitution was written, you know, inspired by the Bible, and it is God's country. It's the home of religious freedom. A lot of people escaped their countries for religious persecution reasons. So we were founded based on religious freedom and many other freedoms aside from that. So plenty of other countries are free now, but America is the the envy of the rest of the world,
Right. Yeah.
for many reasons. And our success was based on the platforms that we have. People want to hate capitalism, but capitalism causes innovation, and it led us to be the global superpower that we are, and hopefully will continue to be, because it looks like with the dollar not being the universal currency is a possibility in the future and everything. That there's a lot of reasons why this country is great, and it is the world's last stand. Because if America falls, there's no place else to run to. I know a lot of people hear that from a lot of different people, but it is the truth, and that's why New York is one of if you want to call it a war. We have psychological and information warfare here, and New York is one of the major battlegrounds, because we can't lose New York the same way we've lost California.
Mark, I'm glad you said it that way. Are there any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, like you said, I'm an average person. There's a lot of sleeping bears that were out there that had no
right.
no desire to run for office. I ran in 2020 once everything started to hit the fan, so to speak, with our bail reform bill in New York, which increased crime, and the mandates and lockdowns that happened. Well, the lockdowns first in 2020, followed by the mandates. So my nonpartisan ideas helped me almost win local elections.
Right.
We did flip a local city council seat for the first time in 100 years. That coincided with my state assembly district. So Ina Vernikoff. We flipped another city council seat in Queens for the first time in decades. And Vicky Palladino, who is a pit bull, definitely not a rhino. And If they were stealing elections, they would have stole it from them. So we flipped Virginia. It's a possibility that they're scared to steal elections. So the important thing is go out there and vote. Your vote counts. You can't stay at home, because if you stay at home, then we'll lose our country. So you have to vote. And although people don't like to donate, I used to raise money for charities, and asking for money for charity is one thing, but charity organizations are great, but the biggest impact in communities comes from good politicians that make changes. So, yes, it's not tax deductible like a charity is, but it does help the community when you make a donation to a candidate that is out there fighting for the people and fighting to make positive changes in the community, probably more so than a charity organization does. So
Yeah,
if you can donate, mark the number 4 newyork.com. And all donations matter, which I put the meme up, all donations matter,
I like
on
that.
my social media. So
I like that. Well, Mark, I'm gonna end the broadcast here in just a second, but I'm gonna keep you off camera. We're gonna talk in
mhm.
the studio after I end the broadcast. So hang on one second. Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in to our show tonight. And please share the podcast, share the video, share the on your social media pages, because not only does it matter for me to kind of get the word out for people to learn about non-candidates, but get unique ideas for our country. When you hear these interviews, sometimes it might not be the candidate, sometimes it's the ideas that the candidate has that we need to promote more of. Either way, it's all an effort to help save our country. And please, like I said, share the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great night.